catching him after a day's work, it appears, still in his golf teaching facility. It's Steve Furlonger joining our podcast. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Well, look, I'm thankful that you would reach out because as I was talking at the top of the show, not recorded for the folks listening, open disclosure behind the scenes here. I was like, okay, the ground reaction forces, I know enough to sort of be dangerous to myself. And so I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since you reached out. So I do appreciate you reaching out. To that quickly before we get into it, because folks are into this sort of stuff to hit the ball longer. Tell us a little bit about Steve. The bio, please just share it and don't be modest. I know what you guys are all like.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a PGA professional based in the UK near Gatwick Airport. A little bit of a techie. Been into my tech for many years, and got into actually my first taste of ground reaction forces started back in 2013 when I had the first body track in the UK. I brought body track out of Canada.
Okay.
Took on the distribution for a year and bought several or many of their mats to sell in the UK. And I was a little bit ahead of the curve because it took me over a year to sell my stock. And then they went global the following year, and they took on different distributors in the UK. But so I had the first wired device, generation 1, which had the green top, actually had buttons on it that you could press to actually activate it and to capture and play back.
All right.
Which were a bit of a pain because golfers would step on the buttons trying to put the tee in the ground whenever they were using it. They soon got away from that. But that was a wired version that went into the laptop. So we was trying to run a system measuring pressure and 1D vertical force, trying to sync it up with a laptop camera with the webcam on the laptop, which was probably running at about 15-20 frames per second. So it's quite difficult to get synchronization. But nevertheless, it was a brilliant system because it was portable. So that was where I kind of started. I pursued kind of measuring pressure and vertical force for a further sort of 4 years. And then I was at the PGA show when Gasp Systems launched their dual force plate, which was measuring force and torque in 3D. And that was an exciting time. So I became good friends with Steve Gould years before that. So it was a pleasure to be with him to launch the dual plate in the States. And then I bought a set of the force plates last year in January 2020. Did the world know what was coming? But I got the plates, had them installed, and then went into lockdown, but had some data captured before we went into lockdown. So fortunately, I had a lot of data to start to kind of study while
so you've just been researching for the while now.
Yes.
Okay.
I was geeking out, but there wasn't many of us. Mark Blackburn had some. Chris hadn't bought his at that point, so there was a handful. Mark Sheftick had his. Steve had sold, I think, 5 or 6 around the world. So there weren't very many of us, and we had no facility to share data. So apart from doing our own kind of screen recordings, we couldn't actually send files to one another, which was the new software that Steve launched later on in the year, which came up with center of mass, vertical location, other stuff for the updates. They gave us the facility to share data amongst the network. So it was an interesting time. Lockdown was a lot of learning, and Steve, many hours that we spent. He was so patient with me because this sort of stuff didn't come easy. It took time to understand kind of the physics behind it all, and he was extremely patient. And it was an incredible learning journey. Learning force and torque in 3 dimensions was brilliant.
Okay, I want to back you up a little bit because you've got me salivating. I'm sure you've got everyone listening this in the same manner right now. But I want to know, obviously, you're a former golfer, turned golf instructor, and it's been an eye-opener for me because personally, I'm always been a club face guy, and you sort of respond to the club face. Now, you guys have come along and you've put an entire different spin on things. You've opened people's eyes, and you've essentially improved folks' pivot, you've improved folks' power, use of the ground, that sort of thing. What was the impetus for you to come at it from this angle? I'm fascinated because I have the blue body track mat and we use it, periodically. And I've always been interested, but I'm going to always divert to the club face. Yet you guys bring such a cool, such an interesting, such a helpful, and such an empowering dimension to it. I'm keen to know how you decided to go on this tack.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as PJ pros, we're sort of taught the impact factors. So we everything goes back to that being the absolute influence on what the ball does. But you know, when I started with ground reaction forces, with vertical force, with body track and pressure, there was you started to see sort of the correlation between the shifting of pressure, the changing of forces underneath the feet. If we could change that faster, we were starting to see clubhead speed. So that was kind of my fascination. Was, you know, if pressure was moving very quickly, we generally started to see that the golfer could create more speed. And then, you know, I'd had a good friend before my body track, before I purchased body track, Lee Cox, who was coaching long drivers. He coached Joe Miller into becoming a 2-time champion. And we got Joe on the mat, and it's like, oh wow, okay, his velocity was extremely high. So we're starting to now. And that's what really fascinated me. So the fastest players were using the ground better. They were creating more force. And then obviously the game changed again when I started to look at it from a 3D perspective. So the 1D, the one linear force, which was vertical force, when we saw the two other linear forces to make the 3D picture of ground reaction forces, it was like, okay, now I would say that from that experience of seeing just 1D, that was 1/10 of the information, really, what was going on under the feet and above the ground with the body center of mass, and the rotations about the center of mass. It was about 1/10 of the information. So when I had the information, started to, you know, very fortunately work with the players that I had last year and that I work with now, the data there was such a big difference between the fastest and how they move, how they push through their feet, their foot action and ground reaction force, and then tour players. And then if we were to take recreational golfers and then take really slow golfers or beginner golfers, such a big difference in how they push through the ground and get that resultant energy back up through the body to help them move.
Yeah, well, look, I'm glad you said that. And I feel like you're about to bring clarity to a number of folks. You're about to unshackle a number of folks and help them to start doing the right thing. Because as soon as I'm, you know, it's no poll, but I'm just, as a golf teacher, pitching this out there. As soon as you use the term GRF or ground reaction forces, people start to think in the vertical element. And the next thing you see folks hopping around the place, not really creating any speed whatsoever, and they miss hitting more golf balls because they're not presenting the club face appropriately. And you said that with the 3D analyses, you've seen, well, you figured out the vertical element was just a small portion of the whole thing. So let's start here. At the risk of using the wrong vernacular, describe the correct movement from address and how the pressure shifts through the backswing and into the downswing and through swing. Can you do that sort of thing? And then we'll sort of we'll just move off that.
Okay, so you want me to describe it in 3D?
Yes. Yeah, please.
Okay, so the golfer will start with a push, whether that's a small push or the fastest players start with a bigger push off of their lead side. And then that will start to allow them to accelerate the center of mass, weight shift towards the trail side. Now, every golfer that I've measured, every single capture that I've got on my system, golfers are moving their center of mass towards the trail side. Now, where they start, it might differ.
At the risk, sorry, I've got to do this. At the risk of not losing anybody, describe the center of mass first. I mean, most golf instructors listening to this, they get it, but now the lay golfer, they're like, okay, what's center of mass? I don't want to be the person in the back of the classroom now that loses this at the heart of the conversation.
Okay, so center of mass would be the point where effectively the mass above, below, either side equals out. Okay, yeah, right. So the point of kind of all forces equal out. So if I was to, for example, you know, if you was to pick up your mobile phone and you was to balance your mobile phone on your finger, you'll be balancing it about its center of mass. Okay, if you can hold your mobile phone on your forefinger and hold it out front, your finger would be under that particular object, the phone under its center of mass.
Okay.
Now, objects rotate about their center of mass. However, we need a force to rotate that. So if I was to, for example, I had this phone and I was trying to push this phone through the middle. So if I applied a force, my finger was directing through the center of the phone would translate. It would just shift across my finger and drop off onto the floor.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
However, if I was to get the force and I was to angle it away from the center of mass, so now I point my finger to the edge of the phone, the corner of the phone, and start to direct my force there, I've created what's called a moment arm. It's the perpendicular distance between the center of mass and the line of action or force. If I can extend that to that outermost point of the phone, I'm now going to start to get a rotation about that center of mass, as well as some kind of translation. It's going to, you know, slide forward slightly. So from a 3D perspective with ground reaction forces, if we put the golfer's center of mass, and this is what GRF does differently to other 3D force plate systems, dual or single plate systems, GRF calculates the vertical center of mass of the golfer. So let's just say that's the belly button of the golfer. Right. Okay. Approximately. It's not actually, it's slightly out front, but they measure that as well. So I on a lot of my social media, when I kind of first hit the scene, I was showing the center of mass as a frisbee. So I had my kind of my yellow frisbee that I was showing. And
by the way, I've seen those videos, by the way.
Okay. So, and I did some TikTok dancing and pushing and stuff like that. And that's kind of those sort of things. Those videos went viral, and it kind of, you know, when I was shouting from the rooftops about this stuff. So we can, you know, if I hold this here, and you can see this on the camera, but I'm holding kind of a, you know, the lid of my jar here. So I'm holding it about my belly button, so I can tilt this way. This is my ability to kind of tilt or launch the ball upwards.
Okay. So for folks listening, go and check out YouTube or my website, markimmelman.com. But all Steve is doing there, he's holding this little disc, kind of looks like the top of your travel coffee mug. And as he rotates it to his right, then his spine is tilting to the right essentially, and opposite to the left-hand side. So just rotating it one way or the other.
Absolutely. If you had you were holding a steering wheel of a bus in front of you, and you were to turn the steering wheel, you would tilt. Yeah. Okay. So that aids there. If I start to tilt, I can aid my ability to launch the ball upwards. Okay. So optimally, we know that from TrackMan and FlightScope and Foresight data that to optimize driver launch, we want to hit the ball on the upward part of the arc. So to do that, to create a tilt, we don't want it to be late, because that's going to cause some problems with the delivery last minute to the ball. We want to be able to create this tilt, you know, at the right time during the downswing to be able to launch the ball to catch it on the upward part. Now, that tilt is somewhat different. We want less of that if we're striking an iron off the ground or a wedge shot or an iron out.
Exactly right. Okay.
So what I saw with the long drivers, obviously their equipment's very different. You know, immediately I was starting to see that they had huge amounts of this kind of tilt because they've got a 1 degree or a 4 degree lofted driver. They're hitting it, you know, 7, 8, 9 on the up. And that amount out to the right is the swing direction as well, which gives them that kind of zeroed out club path, the net difference. So they're needing to do that because they've got equipment that requires a tilting action in their body to send the ball upwards to be able to create loft to launch the ball up.
May I interrupt real fast, because you're doing such a wonderful job of describing this, and so many golfers who talk about tilt getting stuck or tilted or whatever, to get back to your little disc in front of you, if they don't start off with a requisite right tilt for the right hander, they're going to have to try and create some of that, or convert or along those lines. If the ball's too far back, they start off incorrectly, then on the way down, when they're trying to go toward the target, they're having to go in the opposite direction, and that just throws the stuff against the window, cat amongst the pigeons, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's one of that's one rotation about my center of mass. If I was kind of you know, I describe this a lot of the time as a windmill. So if I had the video, the camera was facing me looking at my chest, and you know, I was a windmill, and you know, the hub of the windmill was where my belly button was. So if I can turn this windmill in that direction, I'm going to create this tilt across my body at the right time to be able to launch the ball up.
Yes. All right.
If I then was to get this kind of lid and then turn it so it sits horizontally here, so now we've got, if I was to now describe that this was a merry-go-round, a child's merry-go-round.
All right, gotcha.
Okay, so now effectively I can rotate. So this ability to rotate about my center of mass in this plane, in the horizontal plane, okay, right, will help me open up my pelvis. Okay, so I can get that ground reaction force. If I apply a force, if I was to open the top of a Coke bottle, right, we would hold the top with 2 fingers generally. We would twist it. So we're applying a force in one direction, kind of forwards, and then we're bringing a coupling effect of another force turning backwards. So we've got this dual effect, this coupling effect of a forward force and a backward force. So the merry-go-round would be like, you know, if we was to use that, you know, analogy, that would be daddy pushing the merry-go-round from here and then mummy pushing the merry-go-round from the other side. So Johnny sitting on the merry-go-round will
spinning
go
around at high speed, getting sick.
Absolutely, yes, screaming, saying go faster.
Yeah.
So that's our horizontal plane torque. So if I can get this force that goes front to back, we call it anterior posterior, or heel to toe, or toe to heel force. If I can apply this force from my trail side, heel to toe, pushing forwards, and then my lead side, toe to heel force in that direction, I would then get this coupling effect to be able to rotate horizontally. So my pelvis can open up at high speed, or I could get that kinematic sequence and order of my pelvis opening up first before my torso.
What you're talking about here, that pressure shift from, you know, in the back foot from the toe to the heel, and then as you deliver on the way through from the toe to the heel, that was an eye popper for me, and it became such a better way to describe, you know, what lay people term the weight shift back and forth, because folks think of just shifting to the left and to the right, and they're going from one side to the other. Whereas if you get that pressure, you know, using your horizontal center of mass like that, man, that just helps rotation through the engine of the golf swing so much more.
Absolutely. And one of the things I kind of, you know, came, you know, from the study of ground reaction forces and the database that I kind of created with all of the swings, was that I started to see the tendencies and the way that an early extender, what they do versus somebody that doesn't extend. So somebody that thrusts their pelvis towards the golf ball on the downswing and then stands up to stop falling over or stumbling forwards. That golfer that does that, they actually have a high amount of force from heel to toe from the trail side, which is thrusting the trail hip forwards, but they have a very low amount of force from the lead side, toe to heel, pushing. And now every single early extender that I've got, that I've measured, has a low amount of lead side, toe to heel force, but a high amount of trail side. I've not seen one golfer that doesn't create enough force through their lead side, so they just force their trail hip forwards and don't.
Okay, for folks who are not watching this, you're seeing me bounce around in my chair over here, because what you're saying, Steve, makes so much sense. To get back to your Coke bottle, I've got my water bottle in front of me. So now this is the trail side, and if I'm just pushing force, you know, as if it was heel to toe on the right side of this thing, I'm not creating any, you know, any real rotation. But if I create the opposite side, or the toe to heel on the opposite side, then it becomes more rotary, and I can turn the lid off the bottle. I mean, what you've just said there, I think is going to fix thousands of golfers listening to this thing.
Absolutely. So the measured amount, the golfer needs to create for a greater amount of that toe to heel force through their lead side. 1.5 to 2 times is the amount that I measure with golfers that don't early extend. They're 1.5 to 2 times more in that horizontal kind of force that helps them open their pelvis up, so that they can push the lead side of their pelvis around.
So they're pushing off the ball of their foot backward. Is that what you're
around saying? The forefoot of the foot? That's where they're creating the force. They're not. So if I was to wind the clock back, if I was to say 18 months to 2 years ago, the way I believed a golfer was moving, because I wasn't measuring it that way, the way I believed the golfer was moving their lead side, and I tried to do this myself for many years, I believed that the golfer was pulling their lead hip back. So they was getting their pressure towards their lead heel, and they were pulling their hip back. Well, they don't. They actually push through force. they push their lead side back.
And so for all of you advanced golfers, look at yourself early extending. And the next thing, hey, I've got a drill on my website like this where you've got a chair behind your rear end and saying, hey, rotate one cheek, right cheek to left cheek. Yeah, that's a reference, but the force is coming out of how you're moving pressure in your feet. It's not like
Absolutely.
you know what? But again, Steve, that makes so much sense because if I'm on the dance floor and I'm wanting to hit you with my best moves, if my feet are glued to the ground here, I'm not going to have all sorts of mobility and movement through my center, right?
Absolutely. And I think you move better through your toes a little bit as well. So, you know,
Sure.
we're certainly seeing better action of our body above the ground if you're using the forefoot of each foot there. So, you know, we jump better from the the forefoot side of the foot. So, you know, we need to make sure that we don't drop back on the heels, more of a stabilizer. It's more of that kind of, if we jump, we land on our toes and then the heels then come on the ground to help us stabilize, to gain balance again. But we push off the toes. So we create greater force through our toes.
Okay, this sounds to me like at the end of this conversation, we've got to have drills for each one of these elements. But you've talked 3D. You've given us 2 of those Ds in vertical.
Yeah.
Like the steering of the car, the side to side, the horizontal. Number 3, please.
So we've got side to side. So I'm moving across the camera here. So if I laterally glide or slide across the ground, think side glide, that step in side to side.
Right.
That is a medial lateral force. So it's a left to right or right to left force that makes me move side to side.
Okay. Gotcha. I'm right. I'm making notes here for my podcast notes afterwards. Okay. All right, keep going. I'm with you.
So if effectively, if we've got a weight shift towards our trail side, we must have that kind of that left to right. If you're a right-handed golfer, that left to right pushing off that lead side to make the mass move across. That would be that medial lateral, that lateral force that helps us shift towards the trail side or get that weight shift move that we feel.
I would say I made the comment earlier where people are hearing ground reaction forces and they're bouncing around the place like kangaroos, really. But as it pertains to weight shift, to use the term loosely and likely incorrectly, most golfers, they've got too much of this side to side thing going on and they're losing all of their shape. They're losing all of their velocity, really. And they're adding an inconsistent element to their golf swing. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I see that, I measure it, that they're pushing off their trail side too late. So they begin that push into their downswing and continue that push through the early part of their downswing. Force precedes what we see as motion. Okay. So anything that you see on a camera, there must have been a force before that move. So the slide that happens in the downswing is from a late push off of the trail side.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
And when you say the late push, in the interests of people going to the range and listening to this conversation, they might have this conversation on while they're on the range. Are you able to sort of describe this as it fits into the vertical and the horizontal? Because I'm seeing folks, they're like, okay, well, Steve said I've got to get earlier to the left side. The next thing they're over there and their arms are dangling in Kingdom Coming behind them over here.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I use quite often in social media, I've got sort of these bar stools. I'm sitting on one here now. So if you was to talk about a high back dining chair or a bar stool, and if you was to position that bar stool sort of 2 inches outside of your trail hip, okay, and you was to make an action that kind of bumped your trail hip into the bar stool nice and early. So you've pushed from one side to the other and moved your weight over towards your trail side. What I see the best players do, the most consistent ball strikers and those that are beginning to create, who can create speed as well, is that they may have a bigger shift versus the faster ones who have a bigger shift versus those that are slightly slower than those. So if you take long drivers have a big shift, the next fastest players are tall players, they have a shift. And then our slower players that don't shift as much.
Well, they may incidentally move in the opposite direction of the golf club, right?
Sometimes I see that. not that often. I generally see golfers move towards, because if we was to take our center of mass, approximately the motion of that center of mass, approximately 28% or so is from the arms and the club unit.
That
so
much.
The movement of
you know what? I'm so glad to hear that, because people, because the next thing they hear, and I'm sorry, I'm making you digress. Please hold your thought. But the next thing I see golfers, they'll watch some instructor, and the instructor says, just rotate and your arms will be brought down. And poor golfer hits the right-handed golfer hits the right side of the target, as sure as I'm talking to you. And so you're saying to me nearly 28% of the motion is governed by the arms and the hands?
Yeah, absolutely. So if my arms and hands start and the club starts to move to the right, there's going to be a natural shift of my center of mass towards that side.
Okay, gotcha.
So you put in a push off the lead side. So now we see in video that kind of, I call it the Henrik Stenson, the bump. Okay, you see a bump that might happen before the club moves, or if we was to take Rory, it's more dynamic. It's during the motion of the takeaway of the club.
Okay.
So whether it's an early bump or whether it's a dynamic bump of that, the best players start to push back off their trail side at when the shaft is horizontal on the backswing. So they've gone against the dining chair, okay, when the shaft is horizontal on the backswing, and now from that point up to the top of the backswing, they've started that kind of repositioning, or athletic motion golf call it recentering, of their mass is starting to drift back to the middle of their stance again. So they've shifted and then they push back and recenter.
Which is why you may see some of the, what people call the extension, sort of the opening up of the spine, as there's a recentering going on. Because I also see people, they'll hear folks to say, hey, your backswing, you must turn on your angle, but let's get some spine extension. Then the next thing, poor golfer shifts to the right, lifts up, and they're so, you've seen, you're out of your camera view over there because you're so far off the golf ball. And then finding that thing down there consistently, and we're not even saying off an uneven lie, is next to impossible.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, Mark, I mean, I see golfers that struggle with ball striking, struggling with speed creation, getting their low point ahead of the golf ball with the irons, because they keep moving. They said, they might watch a video and says, this guy says I must shift over towards my trail side. So they keep shifting. They get to top of backswing and they're still shifting. They're over here. And now what they try and do in one go, one foul swoop, they try and make everything move forwards in one go, right?
Then their buddy's like, hey, you're coming over the top. You're like, nah, I'm just trying to hit this golf ball down there.
Absolutely. So the best players are repositioning their weight or recentering their weight back to the center of stance, some slightly behind it, some slightly ahead of it. It's different for different shots. They're recentering before halfway back on their backswing, and they're back to center with certain shots at the top of their backswing, so they've got less of a sliding action required on the downswing.
Fantastic. Okay. I said I wanted to talk about the drills. If you've got anything else along the concept line you want to share, please go ahead. But what I do want to touch, Steve, is that the differential, if you will, and that might be the wrong term. Obviously, if the ball's forward, you can move and you can catch the thing on the upswing. But just a differential in this movement between, say, a wedge swing and then the full-blooded driver swing. So help the folks kind of just compartmentalize that, please.
Okay, so when we start to reduce power, we're going to start to reduce the amount, potentially what the body is going to rotate. We're going to shorten the swing. We're going to shorten the distance that we take the handle or displace or move the handle away from its start position. So when that starts to happen, there's less of a weight shift. So for a wedge shot, if we start to really kind of now bring the speed down with that wedge shot for a specific shot or yardage into a green, there will be no weight shift. It will be very much centered to then slightly ahead of center to help with that low point. Okay, so things are not moving as much off and have to move back as much. They're pretty much staying over to slightly ahead. Okay, that will help the golfer control the low point, which must be ahead of the golf ball, to get that descending blow into it.
Awesome.
Okay,
so cool. All right. And
then with iron shots, I see a little bit, with tour players, I see a little bit of a bump of the the center of mass, think belly button a little bit towards the trail side. Some golfers start with it more towards the lead side at address. Some start with it, you know, over the center of stance. But wherever they start, there's a shift of that towards the trail side. And then again, when the shaft is horizontal to the ground on the backswing, they're beginning to then push back off their trail side and bring that weight shift back to center of stance again by the time they get to the top.
All right. Awesome. Jeez.
With driver,
yeah,
we now start to see a bigger shift of the mass. So we generally see an earlier force precedes motion again. So a bigger push off the lead side, an acceleration of the mass toward a greater acceleration of the mass towards the trail side.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving the club faster. So we now start to see a bit more, you know, a quicker tempo to the swing. I will see as much as these are long drivers. So we take now the extreme, the guys that the fastest on the planet, they get their center of mass and move it 6 inches towards their trail side before shaft horizontal on the backswing.
You know what? I can see that. I've called Brass and DeChambeau over recent months, since the metamorphosis, if you will. And you're right, that happens fast. In fact, it brings to mind Carl Berkshire, who's come on alongside Bryson to help him pick up some more speed. And the movement, to me, as an instructor, doesn't look that violent anymore. And I asked Bryson about it, and he said Carl just said to him, allow the speed to gather.
Yeah.
But you know, Berkshire, if people watched him, at one stage he was sort of shifting from one foot to the other. And I just thought, wow, this is such a cool idea and it's great for timing. But I see what you're saying, because when he's getting into that one foot to the other thing to create the impetus for the backswing, he's back there fast. So he can be going in the opposite direction to your observation. Am I right in my assessment here?
100%. Well, you know, so if we was to take Carl being a long driver, so he's going to be creating that stepping or stomping effect.
Yeah.
He's going to push off his lead side, and then he's going to land the trail side foot and then push immediately back off the trail side.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's trying to do is time his swing to start at the push off point. So he goes, then accelerates across, then pushes back immediately.
Okay.
So that's that side to side media lateral force that he's creating. And the long drivers, they start to create a force. They could get up to 80% of their body weight as a force underneath their kind of lead foot and pushing off of it really hard. And then they will counter that by pushing even harder back off their trail foot to stop the sway continuing past shaft horizontal.
Now, it would be helpful if folks download this and watch what you're doing. But I've got to ask you this, Steve, because as you're moving back and forth, I'm seeing the upper body move with it too. Advise the golfers to this to say, okay, you're moving force between your feet. What's happening here with the area, the sternum and the rest? Talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, generally with the fast players, we may see a slight lean off, because again, if we was to take this, you know, the trunk, the upper body, it's about 65% of the center of mass. The contribution of that area there is from the trunk. So there's quite a large amount of that is moved by the torso, and you'll see long drivers move the torso before the club. Yeah. So the way I'm moving here, you'll see them push off the lead side, move the torso before the handle moves, and then they start to accelerate the handle, and then the extension starts to happen. Now, bear in mind that extension, if we're going to extend the trail side of the body, so if I turn side on now, okay, so a camera looking down the line, looking down towards the target, seeing the golfer in their side on posture, okay, so if I'm going to extend my trail side up and let my lead side come down, I need to create a force, a vertical force, as much as I need that kind of forwards to backward force, that toe to heel force, to push my trail side up, back, and around. Yeah. Okay. So they're going to have to load the trail side with force. They're going to have to, we generally see some flex in the knees change flex. Before the trail leg starts to extend, there may be an increase in the flex, because they're going to then push up, create a force to extend that trail side up. And then we do see a little bit of extension or less of flexion of the spine as they reach the top of the backswing.
You know what I'm sort of seeing, and I'm reading between the lines? that if golfers who listening to this, you want to create some speed, this is not pansy stuff. I mean, you keep using the word force, 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 and I mean, out of the window is going the, swing smoothly stuff, right? Huh?
The fastest players swing the fastest, Mark, don't they? So, this kind of low and slow stuff, my good friend Lee Cox, he talks about low and slow. We've actually, on our app that we've just launched, we talk about that quite a lot. This low and slow, we don't see low and slow in the fastest players. No. We see that club accelerate extremely quickly. We see them create a large amount of force under their foot before their body starts to move. And because they create that a large amount of force, they move the most, but the earliest. Yeah, right? They're not moving late, they're moving early. So then they have to create that counteractive force underneath their trail side to again move the earliest back up and around. Yeah. They're moving faster. Now, if you move slowly, you're not creating force. So how do you move your body? Newton's law, right? How do we move this mass if we haven't got a force, if we're not applying, creating a force to move it? You're simply not going to move fast enough if you don't create force and use the ground to help you.
Fantastic stuff. You've been so helpful, but I know there are folks waiting for you. I did say I wanted to do this. We've dealt with the 3D effect of it. You've opened my eyes. Well, you've informed me further, and so I know you're informing the folks listening. Drills for each one. Something that folks can practice. Let's start with the vertical force. Is there a swing drill? Is there an exercise that your average golfer can just go and do to get a sense for the correct movement, or just to maybe galvanize or improve it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could look at vertical force sort of from both sides. So we need a force that's going to help us move our trail side up. Yeah. Okay. And then effectively the lead side go down. So if you're taking if I was to, grab an elastic, right? Some, whether I've got some tubing or some elastic, I could place this band. I could get one of these. This is a thin sort of elastic band that you can buy on Amazon for about £7.
Like training bands.
Training bands, resistance bands. And if I was to loop that underneath my left foot, okay, and then grip this like a golf club, okay, I can then pull up, okay, and extend that band and pull up, and that's really good. And that acceleration is good to help you get to a higher position at the top of the backswing, and that will help get that extension through that trail side.
Since you're my Yoda now, help me here. I have clients grab a 10-pound medicine ball, hold it in front of them on either side of the ball, and then I have them imagine that they're an elephant with this ball in their arms being the trunk, and they've got to throw the ball over their trail side, because that opens them up, and it gets the arms going up to that situation too. You like?
Absolutely. So effectively what they're doing, they're kind of accelerating their center of mass really quickly upwards. Yeah. And then they're kind of what we sort of get up to the top of the backswing, and they reach this sort of phase where they're very light. We call it unweighted. Yes. Okay. And then they can accelerate it down. So absolutely. Now you can use that med ball to throw it up like I've pulled the resistance band. If you wanted to create a side to side force, so if I was to say a second drill, what you could use, I use a 3 kilo med ball. Yeah. If I was to throw that med ball to my right, I would create a left to right force first to help me toss that ball to my right. So that would help me move and accelerate, okay, my arms and my mass, so I can move that ball really quickly, and then move it to the right. So that would help me with that side to side force, and vice versa. I could throw it to my lead lead side.
Sensational. How about the horizontal?
The horizontal. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this.
And again, for the folks, in case you've lost it, that's almost the rotary element of it.
Okay, so what I use for this, I've got, a frisbee. So if I was to use this lid, if I had a frisbee, I could sit my foot on the frisbee. So this is the frisbee on the ground, upside down.
All right.
Okay. If I put my left foot on the frisbee, okay, my lead foot. Okay. So if I get to the top of the backswing and I slide the frisbee forwards, okay. Okay, so there's no friction there. It's sliding. So I've got no ground reaction force. Okay. That helps me understand and gives me the feel of pushing my foot forwards first. Okay.
I got you. I see where
So
you're going.
So what I do in stage 2 of that drill would be to then put that frisbee close to a wall, and then get them to slide the frisbee into the wall and then push their lead side back and around. Okay.
I'm about to use this, by the way.
You can use sliders. I don't know if Mark, do you have a leaderboard training aid?
No, but yes, I used to. From way back in the day, the Stuart Appleby one. Yeah, the band's perished underneath. I actually love that thing. But you know what I'm thinking too? We've got these discs you place underneath heavy furniture, and you slip them underneath the feet, and you could move stuff all over the place by yourself. They would almost be perfect for what you're saying here.
Absolutely. So I use, for, whenever I coach juniors and I have sort of fun sessions, and I coach ground reaction forces to kids as well, right? You can make it really simple and make it really fun. So I get cardboard box. So I get a cereal box. I will cut out the square of the cereal box there. I actually will draw a clock face on it. Okay. So I put 12 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So I place the card underneath their left foot, and I would say, I want you to slide the card towards 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Now we know the ground reaction force, Newton's law, is that equal and opposite reaction. So the reaction is going to be back towards 5 o'clock is where we want to start to move the lead hip, right? To get the pelvis around. So slide towards 11 o'clock. So top of backswing, create the slide. Okay. And again, you can push it up against the wall. We're pushing towards 11 o'clock. Your foot will go to the front of your shoe. You've got that sort of, effectively now you're pushing off, and you can push that hip back and around.
Brilliant, man. This is awesome. Again, eye-opening. You've helped a lot of people to clarity, and that's why my podcast exists. Information is one thing, but we're thankful that you would do all that research during the COVID lockdown, and we certainly are thankful you'd bring it to us, and you've made it such a simple concept to understand. And for me, like I said, too many folks, they get just a portion of the information, enough to be dangerous. And I feel like you've brought some enlightenment to it. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you.
No problem at all, Mark, and thank you for having me on. And an absolute pleasure.
But before I let you go, though, please share, folks, the social media handles, the website where they can go and find you, please.
Okay, so social media, my kind of biggest portal. You see me mostly on posting on Instagram, and that's at SF Golf Perform, and that's the same for Twitter. And then on my Facebook, it's Steve Furlonger Golf Performance, and my website is stevefurlongergolf.com. I actually do have an app, a speed training app with my good friend Lee Cox, and we do a lot of this stuff. The app is based upon the sort of the kinematics, the movement above the ground, and then the ground reaction force is my kind of specialist field. So Lee and I work together with the app, and you can find that at forceandflowgolf.passion.io, and that's where we do our training for our clients on that app.
Well, you do bring a lot of passion to it, and people have heard it said that the golf swing begins from the ground up. Well, you've helped them to understand how to do that properly. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. I appreciate you bringing it to us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your time.